Hello, I'm J.M. Frey, and welcome to Chapter 18 of the Skylark song. The next day, Robin spent 6 hours replacing a single rusted screw in wings, and figuring out how to calibrate the fuel hose so less fuel sat at the head of the rocket pack, making the pilot nose-heavy and liable to tip into the dirt the moment they were horizontal. After, Robin sat down to a dinner so charged she feared the energy between her and the Coyote might wither the potted fern that protected their privacy. The seneschal kept appearing with new dishes, stopping to whisper things to the Coyote in Clonnish, things that sounded encouraging, like he was trying to convince the Coyote of something. His pale eyes kept cutting to Robin when he spoke, and she didn't like it one bit. Whatever he was advising the Coyote to do, Robin wasn't sure she wanted his tacit approval. It made her question if she was doing something right by their counts, and therefore something wrong in her plans. When they finally sat down to chess, Robin won. She won again the next 2 nights as well, and the Coyote grew more and more agitated with each passing bout. As a result, he started, punishing wasn't the right word, but there was a penalty. He lost, and he behaved differently, so maybe it was like he was trying to give her incentive to lose. He began to lean into the soft touches Robin laid on his arms calculatingly in the study, reaching out to reciprocate. Robin was torn between the ease of the habit, the ease of touching him in passing every time she could, the comfort that grounding herself in his presence provided, and the ruse that she was cultivating, that she did indeed trust him now. And stopping for fear that she would lead him to think that his affections could ever be returned. They couldn't. Not ever. Could they? Ugh. And then there was the way he looked at her, the way his whole body swayed towards her when she entered the gravity of his orbit, the way he tucked her hand against his inner elbow, knuckles warm against his ribs, the way he caught his eyes on her mouth, as if he was thinking of nothing but that kiss that was to come. All of it spoke of genuine admiration, of affection, of adoration, and Robin she simply couldn't afford to let it sway her. Not if she was going to betray him, not if she was going to escape. Since when, she chided herself, is escaping from an enemy prison betraying them? You have to trust and be loyal to someone before you can betray them. I don't trust him. I don't. Do I? She honestly didn't know anymore. And for his part, the Coyote, when he lost their nightly game, offered up useless one-word clues. Robin continued to write them on the back of her vanity mirror, where no one, she hoped, would find them. As the week wore on and his losses piled up, the Coyote's conversation in the workshop, once easy and meaningless, became quiet, confrontational, and brief. His conversations at dinner became barbed with innuendo that Robin had never had the court training to unravel, and across the chess table he became alternately smoldering and impatient. When he took her hand, his fingers were hot and possessive, and when he looked at her, his eyes blazed with something she thought might be anger, while secretly wondering if it might be lust. Whenever they had occasion to touch or make eye contact, he made sure that both lingered on her skin, like drying honey had stuck them together. And yet, he never pushed himself at her, never demanded, never behaved entitled, never whined. When she said no, he stopped. When she ducked away, he didn't pursue. He respected her, she realized, and it was something she had never in 1,000 beehives would have thought she'd have as a captive. He was trying, Robin realized, to tell her of his feelings without having to say it out loud, to convey his desires without allowing it to be overheard by their mutual captors. It was a dangerous, dangerous game he was playing, and Robin was slowly losing the battle against admiring him for his daring. I'd gone completely daft, she thought, every night when she returned to her bedchamber cell. Shuffling through the opening steps of a courtship dance with the Coyote? He's the enemy. I'm mad to even consider it. And yet... She'd been on the receiving end of affection before. She'd seen it enough on Al's face, among some of the other mid-flights. She'd caught Papa watching Mama with a lazy, contented smile. She had seen it on other people's faces too, but she had never been the target of such naked and desperate want before. It made something inside her get warm and quivery, anticipatory and flattered. Then she would remember that it was the Coyote who was looking at her like that, and all the warmth turned to nausea, the anticipation to paranoia, the flattery to fear. She couldn't even put a locked door between them. She had no control over where he was, for how long, or if he was even there with her. The juxtaposition between potential lover and potential murderer was tearing at her. It was distracting, and what's more, it was dangerous. Maybe that was part of his game as well. For on the 5th night after they'd struck their bargain, Robin lost. "Oh," she whispered, sitting back, watching as the Coyote slowly knocked over her king with one long, purposeful finger, his signature, haughty, smug smirk curled into the corner of his mouth. "Checkmate," he growled softly, voice low and ragged in a way that made her insides clench and her heart accelerate. He stood and held out his hand with all the grave cordiality of a monarch. "Finally." Robin swallowed hard and thrust out her chin. "Just a kiss," she reminded herself. "It doesn't mean anything. Just make good on your bargain and be done with it. There's nothing to be scared of because it doesn't mean anything." Swallowing hard a second time, she wondered why now, here, it was so much more difficult to calm her breathing and screw in her courage than it ever was in a mid-air dance. Far more personal, she thought, and then wished she hadn't. Spine cold and knees shaking, she stood and took his proffered hand. The Coyote stepped around the table so they were side by side. He reached up, ran the tips of his fingers over the skin of her bare neck. Robin shivered again and told herself it was only because his hands were so warm and her skin felt so cold. Her flesh contracted with anticipation. He smiled softly, and for a second, Robin was startled by the beatific honesty that shone from the expression, such a match for his mother's above the mantel, such genuine pleasure. Then she wondered how she could have ever forgotten that he was handsome beneath that ill-kempt beard. He cupped her face gently in his hands. He ran his fingers through her terrible white hair and pressed her head back so she had to look up into his face. He twined a lock from behind her ear around his finger, teasing. He played at being the tender lover well, that's for sure. Robin resisted the urge to squeeze her eyes shut, to revel in the feel of his fingers undoing the pins that held her braid in place, to stay blind to what was coming, and willed her body to remember that it was possible, just possible, that he was pretending too. That she was only leaning into him because she was starved for affection, weary with worry, and that what was happening didn't matter. Her heart thumped harder, and she twisted her hands into her skirts more viciously, this time to keep from reaching out and carding her own hands through the short, dark hair at the nape of his neck. Instead of getting on with what he so obviously wanted badly, he paused, her ghost hair twisted up in a gentle chignon, held tight in his grip. Then, from his belt, he pulled out a long, thin hairpin. Like every other gift he'd bequeathed, it was elaborately jeweled, carved of ivory, and spattered with sapphires, a soft-eyed wolf peering out from the cameo-style topper. "This was my mother's," he said softly, as he slid it into place, securing the bun gently. "You're determined to take this farce of a romance at face value, then, are you?" Robin whispered, one last parting shot before she was forced to... "Yes, Skylark," he whispered, and he was so close that she could feel his breath puffing against her mouth. "I am, but it is not a farce to me, and I will not take what you are not willing to give." He pulled her closer, leaned in until his lips brushed her earlobe, his breath hot on her skin. "I will have a kiss from you, because you wish to give me one, or not at all." Then he dropped his hands to hers, lifted them both, and pressed his mouth gently to her knuckles, first one hand, then the other. Then he turned them over and kissed the scars on her palms, left and right, as well. "Wait, but I don't... What? That's it?" Robin blurted, feeling strangely robbed as she sagged without his support. The coyote laughed and raised one brow, watching her with that goddamn smirk. "Would you like more?" "Gods, yes," Robin's body said. But he was still her captor, her enemy, and he had given her an out, so she forced her mouth to say, "No." The coyote chuckled and turned, going to the door to signal for the seneschal. Robin departed without meeting his searching gaze, and went back to her bedroom gladly. She sat in front of the vanity and stared at her face. Her cheeks were flushed, her pupils large, her hair a mess, and he hadn't actually kissed her. "God damn it," she whispered. "What is wrong with me?" "Trust me," the coyote in her memory begged. "Be mine." Though he had never said those words out loud, the possessive nature of his affection had left little room for imagination about his ultimate goal. And Robin had twisted that, used it. She had preyed on his good heart, on his desire to end the war, and she was going to leave him. Did that make her any better than his braggart brother or his mad king? "I can't stay," she reminded herself. "I can't stay, and I can't tell him what I'm planning, or I'll never get out. I don't know if he'll tell them, but I can't take that chance. I can't." The skin on her hands where his lips had touched burned, and she clenched her fingers into fists. What if it isn't true? What if it really is just all a game or a ploy? But her heart denied that possibility, even as it ignited with the pain of guilt, of shame, of sorrow. Oh, gods, what was she doing? Sitting there, agonizing over flirting with the man who had shot her down, the man who had stolen the sky from her. Robin took a deep, shuddering breath and covered her eyes with her hands. She wanted to scrub at them, but feared she'd get the stupid Klonn cosmetics all over her cheeks. Vicious and sudden nausea clawed at her guts. She felt the heat drain from her face. Robin shot to her feet, toppling the vanity stool behind her, and fell to her knees, arms wrapped around her midsection as though she could use them to hold the remnants of her dinner where they belonged. She had to leave. She couldn't stay here any longer. For all that the coyote was her enemy, she knew that she felt something for him. Not love. Not yet, at least, but affection, perhaps, the first faint buzz of something that, if she let it, if she wasn't careful, might grow into the very thing he desired from her. And guilt, because she knew she couldn't trust him, couldn't trust herself with him. What if it was wonderful? What if it was perfect? What if it was right to kiss him? Because that was a prison too, of a kind, wasn't it? He could make her want to stay if he could make her love him. The room lurched a little, suddenly too hot, stuffy, close, suffocating for all its grandeur. "No," she told herself as she leaned forward and rested her forehead on the plush carpet, cool against her heated skin. "No, he doesn't mean it. Doesn't mean any of it." She wanted to scream, to flail, to sob with the uncertainty that tore at her with vicious canine claws. Instead, she stayed curled around herself, head on the carpet, and breathed, slowly, in and out, until the panic and pain and guilt ebbed away. She decided that she had to keep playing the part, at least for now, until he slipped up and offered her a chance at escape. And then she sat back, resting her hands on her thighs through too many layers of skirts, and took a deep, steadying breath. If she stayed here, she would never be allowed to fly again. Ever. And that was unacceptable. No matter what else her heart might feel, the arguments her brain tried to levy at her, that was the only thing that mattered. She would leave. And soon. as soon as the opportunity presented itself. With the panic abated and nothing else to occupy her thoughts, she let her mind wander back towards the mystery of the clues. South, bird, 3, flight. Damn and double damn, she thought. Those are running awful clues. Birds, feathers fly, wings as the bird flies. Oh, I can't remember the whole list. Her brain spun in circles, trying to match the twisted logic of the way the coyote played chess with the clues he had spun out like a spider's web. She pushed to her feet and turned, intending to go back to the mirror and the list of random words that refused to resolve into anything solid. Instead, exhausted and annoyed with herself, Robin paced in the only tight, small circle the furniture allowed. She stared at the darkness of the ceiling, hands on her hips, thinking, head tilted back. Next move, Captain. What's the next move in this chess game? A key. Get something to jimmy the lock. Something they won't miss. Something thin. Something long. Something like... Robin stopped, going utterly still. Though she was alone, and the coyote had promised her that this room, this cell, was free from prying eyes and ears, Robin still schooled her expression to utter blankness, and tried very hard not to look like she was assessing whether or not the hairpin resting ever so gently against her nape was thin enough to slide inside a keyhole.
Give up when you're down. Fly as long as you can.